11:47 p.m. The rain carved silver streaks down David's face as he turned the final lock at Millbrook Supermarket. Another endless shift. Another empty parking lot stretching into darkness. The broken street light flickered once, died. His shoulders ached with the weight of 3 back-to-back shifts this week, the extra money barely covering Emma's school science trip. He exhaled slowly, watching his breath crystallize in the November chill when the sound cut through the storm like a blade. Soft, desperate, human. He froze. There, crumpled against the rust-stained dumpster, sat a woman who didn't belong. Christian Louboutin heels sinking into murky puddles, midnight blue silk dress clinging to trembling skin. Perfectly manicured hands pressed against her mouth to stifle sobs that shook her entire body. But her eyes, God, her eyes held the kind of terror that money couldn't buy and power couldn't protect against. Primal fear. The hunted kind. David approached slowly, the way he'd approach injured animals in his grandfather's barn as a child. The woman flinched at his shadow, pressing herself harder against the metal container as if trying to disappear into it. Her mascara had carved black rivers down alabaster cheeks. A bruise was forming along her jawline. When David peeled off his worn security jacket and draped it over her shoulders, she looked up at him like he was her last breath of hope in a drowning world. The jacket, faded blue with the Millbrook logo patched 3 times, looked absurdly ordinary against her obvious wealth. "Sir," she whispered, voice fracturing with each syllable, raindrops catching on her eyelashes like diamonds. "Please don't let them take me." The words hung between them in the rain-soaked air. David's pulse quickened, his mouth suddenly dripped. A protective instinct rose in him that had nothing to do with his security badge and everything to do with the father who'd spent 3 years raising a daughter alone. His fingers tightened around the keys in his pocket, the only weapon he had. "Who's after you?" he asked, scanning the shadows of the parking lot where darkness pooled like spilled ink beneath the broken lights. She shook her head frantically, dark hair plastering against pale cheeks. "I can't." A violent shudder ran through her body, teeth chattering uncontrollably. "Please, I have nowhere else to go." In that moment, neither of them knew that a forgotten night guard was about to become the most dangerous man in America, that this rain-soaked meeting behind a discount supermarket would unravel secrets worth killing for. David knelt beside her, rain soaking through his uniform shirt, plastering the cheap polyester to his skin. The woman couldn't be more than 35, but exhaustion had carved years into her face. Her clothes screamed wealth, the kind that came with corporate boardrooms and private jets. Yet here she sat in a puddle behind a discount grocery store, shaking like a lost child. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" His voice carried the gentle authority of someone who'd spent years calming a daughter's midnight fears. She touched her jaw tentatively, wincing. "It's nothing. My car. It won't start. I don't have anywhere else to go." The lie sat heavy between them, obvious and desperate. Her eyes darted toward the street, scanning for threats that seemed to lurk in every shadow. David had learned during Sarah's long illness not to press when people weren't ready to share their truth. Pain had its own timeline. He helped the woman to her feet, noting how she moved with unconscious grace despite her fear, like a dancer who couldn't forget her training even in crisis. The parking lot offered no shelter, and his beat-up Honda Civic waited in the employee section like a faithful old dog, rust claiming the wheel wells, a crack spider webbing across the passenger window. "I can give you a ride somewhere or call someone for you." Her fingers suddenly gripped his forearm with surprising strength. "No calls, please." Her eyes widened with panic, pulse visibly racing in the delicate hollow of her throat. "No police, no phones, please." Her desperation reminded him of Emma during thunderstorms. That same raw need for safety without questions. That bone-deep fear that reason couldn't touch. "Okay," he said, simply. "No calls." Something in his calm acceptance made her shoulders drop slightly, the first sign that her guard was lowering. A single tear escaped, quickly wiped away with the back of a hand that bore a faint tan line where an expensive watch or bracelet had recently been. The drive to his apartment building passed in careful silence, broken only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the downpour. David stole glances at his unexpected passenger, watching her study the modest neighborhood through rain-streaked windows. Millbrook wasn't much. Working-class families, small gardens protected by chain-link fences, porches with sagging steps but bright welcome mats. The kind of place where people minded their own business but brought casseroles when ambulances came. She seemed to drink in the normalcy like medicine, her breathing gradually slowing as they drove farther from the supermarket. When he parked beside Mrs. Patterson's house with its riot of plastic flamingos, the woman turned to him with something approaching wonder. "You live here?" Not condescending, just curious, as if she'd discovered a hidden world, a snow globe of ordinary life she'd only glimpsed through glass. Third-floor apartment. David killed the engine, its familiar rattle settling into silence. It's not much, but it's warm and dry. He paused at the building's entrance, key hovering near the weather-beaten door. "I should mention I have a 9-year-old daughter, Emma. She's probably asleep, but just so you know." Emma wasn't asleep. She sat cross-legged on their second-hand couch in her favorite star-patterned pajamas, a science textbook open on her lap, brown eyes wide with curiosity as David entered with a stranger. A half-empty mug of cocoa sat forgotten on the coffee table, a marshmallow dissolving into a creamy island. "Dad, you're late and wet," she said matter-of-factly. Then her gaze shifted to the woman behind him, taking in expensive clothes and trembling hands with the sharp observation only children possess. No judgment, just cataloging details like a tiny scientist. "This is Kate," David said, using the name the woman had whispered in the car when he'd finally asked what to call her. She needed a place to get out of the rain. Emma's face lit up with the uncomplicated kindness she'd inherited from her mother. "Hi, Kate. Do you want hot chocolate? Dad makes the best kind with marshmallows that melt just right. He says the secret is a pinch of salt, but I think the secret is extra chocolate." Kate stared at the child as if she'd never seen one before. Then something cracked in her carefully controlled expression, like watching ice break on a frozen lake. "I'd like that very much," she whispered, voice catching on the simple kindness, and Emma beamed as if she'd accomplished something significant. David watched this interaction while toweling his hair, struck by how naturally his daughter offered comfort to a stranger. Sarah had been the same one, heart open to anyone who needed shelter from life's storms. The thought brought its usual stab of loss, sharp and familiar, like pressing on a bruise, but also something new: pride. Emma was becoming her own person, but carrying the best parts of her mother forward. As Kate accepted a steaming mug with hands that still trembled slightly, David caught her studying the modest living room. Family photos on the mantel chronicling Emma's growth and Sarah's absence. Emma's art projects taped to the refrigerator in a colorful collage. A chess set missing 2 pawns on the coffee table, its pieces worn from years of handling. Kate looked like an anthropologist discovering a lost civilization, eyes lingering on the small touches that made a house a home. The throw blanket crocheted by David's grandmother, the bookshelf overflowing with well-loved paperbacks, the plant struggling to survive on the windowsill. What kind of life had she left behind, David wondered? That simple human kindness seemed so foreign, so worthy of awe. 3 days passed before Kate spoke about anything beyond pleasantries. She'd been staying on their couch despite David's offers to find her a motel room or contact family. She claimed her purse had been stolen along with her identification and credit cards, leaving her stranded. The story had more holes than Emma's favorite cheese, but David didn't push. He'd learned during Sarah's 18-month battle with cancer that sometimes people needed time to find words for their pain. Pressure only built walls. Kate made herself useful in ways that revealed her character. She cleaned while he worked, not with the awkward fumbling of someone unused to housework, but with methodical efficiency. She helped Emma with homework, explaining fractions with clever analogies that made the girl's eyes light up with understanding. She cooked dinners that revealed a sophistication his usual mac and cheese couldn't match. Simple ingredients transformed by techniques David had only seen on cooking shows Sarah used to watch. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" he asked one evening as she transformed their dwindling pantry supplies into something that smelled like a restaurant. Her hands stilled momentarily over the cutting board. "My mother believed everyone should know how to nourish themselves," she said carefully. "Even children with silver spoons." The phrasing struck him as odd, filed away with other puzzle pieces. Her perfect posture, the way she automatically reached for a non-existent phone in moments of silence, how she startled at the neighbor's doorbell as if unexpected visitors were unheard of. Kate moved through their small space with careful gratitude, making the bed couch each morning with hospital corners, asking permission before using anything, as if afraid that too much comfort might make her unwelcome. Her designer clothes, now washed and hanging in David's closet, were replaced by borrowed sweatpants and t-shirts that somehow looked elegant on her frame. Emma adored her immediately with the uncomplicated acceptance children offer, before life teaches them caution. Kate listened to 9-year-old explanations of scientific theories with genuine interest, helped with art projects without taking over, and seemed endlessly patient with questions about everything from quantum physics to why boys were so weird. Girls are weird too, Kate had told her seriously. Everyone's weird in their own way. That's what makes humans interesting. David would come home from his security shifts, muscles aching from standing, to find them building elaborate structures from Emma's blocks. Or Kate explaining the periodic table using kitchen spices, cinnamon for iron, black pepper for carbon, salt for sodium. "She's really smart, Dad," Emma confided one evening as they cleaned dishes, her small hands wrapped in yellow rubber gloves too big for her. "And sad, but she's getting less sad each day. I can tell because her eyes crinkle more when she smiles now. Before they stayed flat. Out of the mouths of babes." David had noticed the same thing, how Kate's shoulders gradually unclenched from their perpetual defensive posture, how genuine smiles began replacing polite ones, how she laughed at Emma's jokes without that split-second delay of someone remembering how to be human. He'd watched the transformation with a mix of relief and something more complicated that tightened his chest when he caught her humming while folding laundry or found her asleep on the couch, finally peaceful. The first significant crack in Kate's careful facade came during a trip to Millbrook's farmers market. Emma had dragged them both to see the weekend vendors, chattering excitedly about Mrs. Chen's honeycomb and the organic vegetables she wanted for a school project on sustainable farming. "I've never grown anything," Kate admitted as they wandered between stalls. "Not even a houseplant. Dad kills plants too," Emma said cheerfully. "Mom was the one with the green thumb. She said plants need someone to talk to, just like people." Kate nodded thoughtfully. "My mother used to say plants respond to love. I always thought she was being sentimental, but apparently there's scientific evidence that plants respond to human voices." She moved through the modest crowd like she was walking through a museum, studying faces with fascination. The weathered lines of the apple farmer, the laugh-creased eyes of the bread seller, the easy camaraderie between neighboring vendors. Her gaze lingered on a young father carrying his toddler on his shoulders, the child's hands tangled in his hair. Something like longing flashed across her face before she looked away. At the flower vendor, she stopped abruptly, her entire body going still. "Peonies," she breathed, reaching toward white blooms with trembling fingers. "My mother grew these in our garden. She said they were the queens of the flower world, demanding but worth the effort." The vendor, a weathered man named Tom with soil permanently embedded in his nail beds, smiled broadly. "Beautiful choice, miss. These are local, grown right here in Connecticut soil. Best in the country for peonies." Kate's hand snapped back as if burned. Connecticut. Her voice barely audible, color draining from her face. David filed that detail away, noting how she suddenly seemed eager to leave, eyes darting around the market as if searching for hidden threats. She tugged her borrowed baseball cap lower over her face and suggested they return home, complaining of a headache that hadn't existed minutes before. That evening, as Emma worked on homework at the kitchen table, David found Kate standing at their small kitchen window, staring at nothing. The setting sun caught gold highlights in her dark hair, and for the first time, he noticed how beautiful she was beneath the exhaustion and fear. Not magazine beautiful, but real, the kind of face that told stories if you knew how to read them. Strength in the set of her jaw, intelligence in the creases beside her eyes, sorrow in the downward turn of her mouth when she thought no one was watching. "You okay?" he asked quietly, keeping his distance. 3 years of single parenthood had taught him when to approach and when to give space. She turned, and he caught something raw in her expression before she shuttered it away like closing a book mid-chapter. I was just thinking about peonies. Funny how smells can transport you back to being 7 years old, picking flowers with your mother. Her voice carried weight, not just memory, but grief. She used to let me arrange them for the dining room table, said I had an artist's eye. She ran her fingers along the window frame, tracing a crack in the paint. Does it ever get easier, losing someone who shaped your whole world? The question caught him off guard with its naked vulnerability. Sarah loved flowers, David offered after a moment, leaning against the counter. Our tiny balcony was packed with pots. The neighbors complained about water dripping down, but she just planted them more trailing things as an apology. The memory made him smile despite the familiar ache. Emma still talks to them sometimes, tells them about her day. I hear her through the window. Kate's face softened at the mention of Sarah, the first time she'd seemed genuinely curious about David's past, rather than carefully deflecting personal questions. Tell me about her. Your wife, if you want to, that is. They sat at the small kitchen table, Emma's multiplication worksheets providing gentle background noise, and David found himself sharing memories he'd kept locked away like treasured photographs too painful to view. Sarah's laugh, a full-bodied thing that started in her toes. Her terrible cooking that somehow always tasted perfect because it was made with absolute conviction. The way she'd dance while folding laundry, grabbing Emma for impromptu waltzes around the living room, singing off-key to 80s power ballads. How she'd faced her cancer diagnosis with fury rather than sadness, angry at missing Emma's future, not afraid of her own ending. She sounds like she lived completely, Kate said, twisting a paper napkin between her fingers. No half measures. She did, David agreed. Even at the end, when the pain was bad, she'd say, "At least I know exactly how much I love this life." Some people never get that clarity. Kate listened with absolute attention, occasionally asking gentle questions that showed she understood the difference between losing someone and having someone taken from you. Her own grief seemed to echo in the spaces between her words. "She sounds extraordinary," Kate said when David's stories wound down, the kitchen now dark except for the small light above the stove. "Emma has her eyes and her spirit, I think. That curiosity, that lack of fear." David nodded, throat tight with emotion that still ambushed him at unexpected moments. "Some days I look at Emma and see Sarah so clearly it takes my breath away. That determined little chin, the way she tilts her head when she's thinking hard." He swallowed hard. "Other days I worry I'm not enough, that I can't give her what a mother would, that I'm missing things a woman would notice." Kate reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. Her skin was soft, unmarked by manual labor, but her grip was strong. You're raising an incredible human being, David. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens because you see her, really see her. Do you know how rare that is? To be truly seen?" The compliment hit differently coming from her, someone who clearly understood the weight of responsibility, even if he didn't know the details of her own burdens. In the 3 days she'd been with them, Kate had watched him with Emma with an attention that felt like more than casual observation, like she was studying a language she'd forgotten how to speak. The evening Emma got sick marked the turning point in their careful dance around each other's secrets. It started with a fever that spiked suddenly after dinner, Emma's cheeks flushing crimson as she pushed away her plate. By bedtime, she was shivering violently, followed by chills that had her teeth chattering despite David's efforts to warm her with extra blankets. Kate took one look at Emma's glazed eyes and went into crisis mode with an efficiency that spoke of experience. "We need to get her to a hospital now." Her voice carried absolute authority, the first time David had heard her speak with such command. Gone was the cautious houseguest, replaced by someone accustomed to making life-altering decisions without hesitation. Within minutes, she'd called a cab, wrapped Emma in blankets, and was cradling the semi-conscious child while barking directions to the driver. David sat beside them, heart hammering against his ribs, watching Kate check Emma's pulse with practiced fingers against the girl's wrist. At Millbrook General, she moved through the emergency room like she owned it, back straight, voice clear and authoritative as she approached the intake desk. 9-year-old female, temperature 104.2, presenting with sudden onset fever, chills and lethargy, possible bacterial infection. She rattled off symptoms like a medical professional while David stood frozen, parental fear momentarily paralyzing him. The triage nurse, a tired-looking woman with frizzy gray hair, took one look at Kate's confident demeanor and immediately upgraded Emma's priority. Dr. Martinez, the attending physician, treated Kate with a deference that seemed odd for someone whose only identification was a story about a lost purse. "We'll start with a CBC and blood cultures," the doctor said, addressing his comments to Kate rather than David. "Given her symptoms, I'm concerned about possible sepsis." Kate nodded crisply. "I'd also suggest checking her urinary tract. She mentioned stomach pain yesterday that could indicate a kidney infection." David watched in stunned silence as Kate rattled off Emma's medical history with perfect accuracy. The ear infection last winter, her mild allergy to penicillin, the fact that she hadn't had her tonsils removed despite recurring strep infections. Details he'd mentioned only in passing over their shared meals. Somehow, Kate managed to get Emma admitted to a private room with a window view that David knew their insurance wouldn't begin to cover, a room with actual artwork on the walls instead of the standard hospital prints. "Don't worry about the costs," Kate said when David finally found his voice and started to protest. "I'll handle it." She produced a platinum credit card from seemingly nowhere, the kind that didn't have limits and certainly didn't belong to someone stranded without identification. David stared at the credit card in Kate's hand, noting the name embossed in elegant script. Catherine E. Morrison. Not Kate Miller, the name she'd given him. Catherine Morrison, a name that sounded vaguely familiar in a way that made his stomach clench with unease. While Kate spoke with doctors about Emma's condition using medical knowledge no ordinary person possessed, discussing white blood cell counts and antibiotic protocols, David stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. A simple Google search for Catherine Morrison made his world tilt sideways. CEO of Morrison Industries. Forbes' list of most powerful women in America. Net worth $2.3 billion. Recent headlines about her mysterious disappearance from a board meeting 6 weeks ago. Corporate lawyers searching for their missing executive. Stock prices plummeting. Rumors of mental breakdown. Speculation about corporate espionage. The woman caring for his daughter in the hospital room wasn't Kate Miller, struggling stranger. She was Catherine Morrison, one of the most powerful people in the country. A woman whose face had graced magazine covers, who controlled a corporate empire employing 50,000 people, whose decisions affected global markets. David walked back into Emma's room on unsteady legs, seeing Kate, Catherine, with completely different eyes. The expensive clothes she'd arrived in, the casual way she'd handled the hospital fees, her knowledge of medical procedures and corporate efficiency, her perfect posture and articulate speech. Everything clicked into place with sickening clarity. This woman who'd been living in his home, eating at his table, reading bedtime stories to his daughter, had been lying about everything, not just her name, but her entire identity. His chest constricted with something between anger and betrayal. Had it all been an act? The vulnerability, the growing friendship, the connection he'd felt forming between them? When she looked up from Emma's bedside, genuine worry creasing her features as she stroked the sleeping child's hair, David felt the foundation of trust they'd built cracking beneath him, like spring ice. "We need to talk," he said quietly, voice tight with controlled emotion. Outside. The hospital corridor stretched empty at 2:00 a.m., fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows on their faces. Catherine stood with her back against the wall, shoulders squared, chin lifted, and for the first time since he'd found her in the rain, she looked like the powerful executive she actually was. The transformation was subtle but unmistakable. A shift in posture, a hardening around the eyes, the mask of vulnerability falling away to reveal steel beneath. "You know," she said simply. It wasn't a question. David held up his phone, showing her own corporate headshot from Morrison Industries' website. Catherine in a tailored navy suit, hair swept into an elegant knot, expression confident and uncompromising. So different from the woman who'd been teaching Emma to make paper airplanes yesterday afternoon. Catherine Elizabeth Morrison, CEO, missing for 6 weeks. His voice sounded hollow, even to his own ears, echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "Who are you really, and what are you doing with my family?" She closed her eyes briefly, the fluorescent lights emphasizing the dark circles beneath them. When she opened them again, the vulnerability was back, but tempered now with something that looked like relief, as if keeping the secret had been a physical weight. My name is Catherine Morrison, and I'm exactly who those articles say I am. I built Morrison Industries from my father's small manufacturing company into a Fortune 500 corporation. Her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to boardrooms and billion-dollar decisions. We make medical equipment, specialized electronics, and defense components. 50,000 employees. Operations in 12 countries. She crossed her arms tightly across her chest. Self-protection rather than defiance. 6 weeks ago, I walked out of a meeting where my own board of directors was planning to sell key divisions to overseas investors, eliminating thousands of American jobs to pad their quarterly profits. When I refused to sign off on the deal, they began questioning my mental state, suggesting I was suffering from exhaustion and poor judgment. The words came faster now, as if released from a dam, her carefully controlled public persona fracturing to reveal genuine fear. I realized they were building a case to have me declared unfit, to force me out and install someone more cooperative, someone who wouldn't ask questions about offshore accounts and technology transfers to countries under trade restrictions. David leaned against the opposite wall, trying to process the magnitude of what she was telling him, the conspiracy that sounded like something from a thriller movie rather than real life. So you ran away. Catherine laughed bitterly, the sound echoing in the empty corridor. I prefer to think of it as strategic withdrawal. I needed time to gather evidence of their conspiracy, to build a legal case before they could destroy me professionally and personally. She gestured toward Emma's room. I never intended to involve anyone else. I was supposed to lie low, maybe stay at a small hotel under a false name until I could meet with federal investigators. But then my rental car broke down in that parking lot. And you, her voice softened, losing its corporate edge. You offered me your jacket like it was the most natural thing in the world. When was the last time someone showed me kindness without wanting something in return? Everything you told us was a lie. David's words came out harsher than he'd intended, but the betrayal felt like a physical wound, sharp and hot behind his sternum. He'd begun to trust her, to let her into the carefully protected world he'd built for Emma after Sarah's death. Catherine flinched as if he'd struck her, color draining from her face. Not everything. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Kate Miller might not be my real name, but the person you've gotten to know, she's more real than I've been in 15 years. The woman who helps Emma with science projects and burns toast and talks to you about books, that's who I am when no one's watching. When I don't have to be Catherine Morrison, Bow. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see tears threatening at the corners of her eyes, close enough to smell the hospital antiseptic on her clothes. David, I never meant for this to happen. I was supposed to stay a few days and disappear, but Emma makes me laugh like I haven't in years. And you? Her voice broke slightly. You make me remember what it feels like to be valued for who I am, not what I can do for someone's profit margins. How do I know what's real? The question hung between them like a challenge, his hands clenched at his sides to stop their trembling. You have billions of dollars. You could buy this entire town. What am I to you? Some kind of anthropological experiment? Rich woman slumming with the working class? Catherine's face crumpled at his words, and for a moment she looked as broken as the night he'd found her crouched by the dumpster, all pretense and composure washed away by genuine pain. You're the first person in 20 years who's asked me what I want instead of telling me what I need to do. You're the man who gave his coat to a stranger without asking questions. You're the father who works 3 jobs to give his daughter every opportunity, who talks about his late wife like she was a gift from heaven, who notices when Emma's quiet and knows exactly what stories make her laugh. Her voice broke on the last words, a tear finally escaping to trace a silver path down her cheek. You're everything I never thought I deserved. Everything I thought only existed in movies about normal people. Before David could respond, Emma's voice called weakly from the hospital room. Dad? Kate? Where are you? They both turned toward the sound, and David saw something in Catherine's face that looked like panic. Not for herself, but for the child calling her name. What does this mean for Emma? Catherine asked quietly, vulnerability naked in her expression. She's gotten attached. She calls me her bonus mom sometimes when she thinks I can't hear. The words hit David like a physical blow, oxygen leaving his lungs in a rush. Emma, who'd lost her mother so young, who still sometimes cried at night for Sarah, had been allowing herself to love Catherine. And now they were facing another loss, another person torn away from their small family. The thought made his chest ache with a familiar, helpless fury, the same he'd felt watching Sarah slip away, despite all the doctor's efforts. "I don't know," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I honestly don't know." They returned to Emma's room to find her sitting up in bed, fever broken, but eyes bright with worry. An IV dripped antibiotics into her arm, medical monitors casting a blue glow across her pale face. "Are you fighting?" she asked with the directness children possessed. "You both look sad." Catherine sat on the edge of the hospital point, taking Emma's small hand in hers. Her thumb traced gentle circles on the child's palm. "Sometimes grown-ups have complicated problems, sweetheart. It doesn't mean anyone did anything wrong." Emma studied Catherine's face with 9-year-old wisdom that sometimes startled David with its clarity. "Are you going to leave us?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Catherine looked at David, then back at Emma, her expression caught between truth and protection. "I might have to go away for a while. There are people looking for me, and I don't want to bring trouble to your family." Emma's face fell, her lower lip trembling, and David felt his heart breaking all over again. He'd promised Sarah he would protect their daughter from more pain, and here they were. As he watched his daughter's fingers tighten around Catherine's hand, the door opened and a nurse entered the room. The nurse's familiar face sent a jolt of recognition through David's body. Nurse Jennings, the woman who had cared for Sarah during her final weeks with a gentleness David still remembered in his dreams. "Mr. Thompson," she said warmly, then froze when she saw Catherine. Recognition flooded her features, followed by confusion. "Oh, Miss Morrison, I didn't realize. I'm sorry, Catherine's spine stiffened, her public mask sliding into place with practiced ease. "You recognize me?" Nurse Jennings nodded, confusion evident on her face as she looked between David and Catherine. "Of course, how could I forget? Your foundation funded our entire oncology wing 3 years ago. You were here for the ribbon cutting." Her eyes widened as she turned to David. "And you were here too, Mr. Thompson. Your wife was one of our first patients in the new wing." "I remember because we were still getting the equipment set up." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment, sound fading as if David were underwater. He stared at Catherine, whose face had gone completely white, fingers gripping the hospital bed rail until her knuckles matched the sheets. "You funded the wing where Sarah was treated?" "Morrison Family Foundation," Nurse Jennings confirmed, oblivious to the tension filling the room like smoke. Ms. Morrison personally oversaw the project after her own mother died of cancer. She insisted on private family rooms, so patients wouldn't have to be separated from their loved ones. She glanced at her chart, suddenly professional again. "Emma's looking much better. The antibiotics are working. We'll need to keep her overnight for observation, but her blood work is promising." After the nurse left, silence stretched between them like a living thing, charged with questions and revelations. Emma had fallen back asleep, her breathing steady, small fingers still intertwined with Catherine's. "You knew," David finally said, his voice barely audible over the beeping monitors. "You knew who I was when you got in my car that night." Catherine's hands trembled as she gently disentangled herself from Emma's grip and folded them in her lap. "I recognized your name when you introduced yourself, yes. Thompson isn't common, and something about your face seemed familiar. But I didn't seek you out, David. I had no idea you worked at that supermarket. My car really did break down. I was supposed to meet a former employee who had information about the board's plans. But you remembered meeting me?" The question felt important somehow, a key piece in a puzzle he couldn't yet see clearly. "Not exactly meeting," Catherine said softly, her gaze fixed on Emma's sleeping face. "I remember seeing you, the husband who never left his wife's side, even when the doctors said there was nothing more they could do. The father who read stories to his little girl in the waiting room, making different voices for each character, even though your own voice was breaking with exhaustion." Her eyes met his, raw with emotion. "I remember thinking that was what real love looked like." Emma, who had been feigning sleep but following this exchange with growing interest, suddenly brightened. So you're the lady who built the special rooms where Mommy stayed? Dad says those doctors and nurses were angels. Catherine's composure finally broke. A single tear slid down her cheek as she nodded, reaching out to brush Emma's hair from her forehead with tender fingers. My mother had cancer too, Emma. I wanted to build a place where families could be together during the hard times, where little girls wouldn't have to be separated from their parents. David felt the room tilt again, but differently this time. Not with betrayal, but with the strange vertigo of fate. The truth was reconstructing itself in his mind, not erasing the lies, but adding layers of complexity he hadn't imagined. Had their meeting really been coincidence? Or something more like gravity, pulling together two people marked by similar losses? Why didn't you tell me? He asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. At first, I couldn't tell anyone anything, Catherine said, her fingers still absently stroking Emma's hair. I didn't know who I could trust. Then as days passed, I was afraid. Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd think I was crazy for running away from my own company. Afraid of losing the only real connection I've had in years. She looked down at Emma's small hand still resting near hers. Afraid of losing this family you let me borrow. The naked honesty in her voice struck David more powerfully than any explanation could have. In that moment, looking at Catherine's unguarded expression as she watched over his daughter, he realized that whatever mask she'd worn as Kate Miller, the emotions behind it had been real. The question was whether that would be enough to bridge the chasm between their worlds, or whether she would disappear back into her corporate life, leaving them with another Kate-shaped hole to patch over. Neither of them noticed the black sedan that had parked across from the hospital, its tinted windows concealing the man inside who spoke quietly into a phone. We found her, and you won't believe who she's with. The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 black SUVs parked outside the hospital. Catherine spotted them from Emma's window and went pale, her coffee cup trembling in her hand, dark liquid spilling over her fingers, though she didn't seem to notice. They found me. Her voice carried resignation and fear in equal measure, the brief flicker of hope from the previous night's revelations extinguished. David watched her transform before his eyes, spine straightening, shoulders squaring, chin lifting as if preparing for battle. The Kate who'd made pancakes in his kitchen disappeared, replaced by Catherine Morrison, CEO, donning invisible armor. Within an hour, the hospital lobby filled with people in expensive suits, lawyers with leather portfolios, corporate executives checking platinum watches, and security personnel who looked like they could bench press small cars. They moved with practiced coordination, clearing civilians from their path without seeming to notice them, speaking in hushed tones through discreet earpieces. Leading them was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair pulled into a severe bun and eyes like winter storms, pale blue, cold, calculating. Her tailored charcoal suit probably cost more than David's yearly salary. She introduced herself as Patricia Wells, senior partner at Morrison Industries law firm, her voice cultured and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. Miss Morrison, she said with the tone of a disapproving parent when she entered Emma's room, you've caused quite a stir. Catherine stood at the window, shoulders back, perfectly composed except for the white-knuckled grip on the windowsill behind her. Emma, still in her hospital bed, looked between the adults with growing concern, instinctively reaching for David's hand. He squeezed her fingers reassuringly, though his own stomach churned with apprehension. Patricia Wells launched into a practiced speech about corporate responsibility, fiduciary duty, and the chaos Catherine's disappearance had caused. Stock prices had plummeted 22%. 3 major deals were stalled. International partners were threatening to withdraw. The board of directors was considering emergency measures to maintain stability. You have obligations, Wells concluded, voice softening to something almost maternal, but with steel beneath, to 50,000 employees and millions of shareholders. Personal feelings are a luxury you cannot afford. Catherine listened with the expression of someone receiving a death sentence, resigned, hollow-eyed. When Wells finished, the room fell silent except for the beeping of Emma's monitors and the distant sounds of hospital activity. I need 5 minutes, Catherine said quietly, which minutes alone with my friends. Wells checked her watch with obvious irritation. Ms. Morrison, the corporate jet is waiting. We have a shareholders meeting at 8 o'clock a.m. tomorrow in New York. The board expects you to reassure them of your continued leadership and mental fitness. Catherine's voice turned sharp, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. I said 5 minutes. Unless you want to explain to the board why their CEO had a nervous breakdown in a hospital room, you'll give me space to say goodbye properly. Wells's eyes narrowed, assessing the situation with cold calculation. Something passed between the two women, an understanding based on years of professional relationship. 5 minutes, she agreed finally. Not a second more. We have a situation brewing that requires your immediate attention. She gestured for the others to step outside. The door closed with a soft click that somehow sounded as final as a prison cell locking. When they were alone, Catherine turned to David and Emma with tears streaming down her face, no longer bothering to maintain her corporate mask. Her hands trembled as she brushed hair from Emma's forehead in a tender gesture. I have to go, she whispered. If I don't, they'll destroy everything I've worked to build. 50,000 people depend on Morrison Industries for their jobs. If the wrong people take control... Emma's lower lip trembled, her small face screwing up with the effort not to cry. But we depend on you too. Can't they find someone else to run the company? Catherine knelt beside the hospital bed, eye level with Emma, smoothing the child's hair with gentle fingers. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, sweetheart. But I want you to know that these past weeks with you and your dad have been the happiest of my life. Emma launched herself forward, thin arms wrapping around Catherine's neck in a fierce hug. You're the only one who understands about the stars and black holes and why my science projects matter, she whispered fiercely. Dad tries, but he doesn't really get it. David's throat tightened, watching the embrace. The simple truth in his daughter's words stung, but he couldn't deny it. Catherine had connected with Emma in ways he'd struggled to since Sarah's death, filling gaps he hadn't even realized existed. Catherine held Emma tightly, eyes closed, memorizing the moment. I'll always understand about the stars, Emma, even when I'm not here, and your dad understands the most important thing, how amazing you are. She gently disentangled herself and turned to David. He saw the woman he'd fallen in love with, because he could admit that now, at least to himself, warring with the corporate executive she had to be. Two versions of the same person, both real, both trapped by circumstance. Thank you for showing me what a real family looks like, Catherine said softly. I'd forgotten. David felt something break inside his chest, sharp edges piercing his lungs. So that's it? You just walk away? Catherine stood slowly, transforming back into the powerful woman the lawyers expected, though the effect was somewhat undermined by the hospital visitor's pass still clipped to her borrowed sweater. What choice do I have? Her voice held a bitter edge. You were right yesterday. I have billions of dollars and you work security at a grocery store. I live in boardrooms and you live in the real world. Maybe it's better this way. But her voice shook on the last words, betraying the pain she was trying to hide. Emma sat up straighter in her hospital bed, arms crossed over her chest. That's stupid, she announced with 9-year-old bluntness, cheeks flushed with emotion. Money doesn't make someone a good person. Dad always says it's what you do when nobody's watching that counts. Catherine smiled through her tears. Your dad is a very wise man. And you're a good person when nobody's watching, Emma insisted. I've seen you. You talk to spiders instead of squishing them. You always save the last cookie for someone else. You fold the towels the way Dad likes, even though you think it's silly. The simple observations hit harder than any elaborate declaration could have. Catherine's carefully constructed composure cracked again, revealing the woman beneath the CEO. A sharp knock interrupted them. Patricia Wells peered through the door window, tapping her watch meaningfully. Catherine straightened her shoulders, and David watched the transformation complete itself. The vulnerable woman who'd shared their dinner table disappeared, replaced by a corporate leader worth billions. She kissed Emma's forehead gently. Be good for your dad, okay? And remember that bonus moms never really leave. They just love you from farther away. Then she turned to David, and for a moment her mask slipped. Her fingers brushed his, the briefest touch. Thank you for giving me a home when I needed one most. Before he could respond, before he could find words for the storm of emotions churning inside him, she was gone, swept away by lawyers and executives toward a life he couldn't begin to understand. The room felt suddenly larger and emptier without her presence, as if she'd taken some essential energy with her. Emma cried quietly as they watched the SUVs pull away from the hospital parking lot, black vehicles gleaming in the morning sun like malevolent beetles. David held her close, his own heart breaking as Catherine disappeared back into her world of power and privilege, skyscrapers and shareholders. "Will we ever see her again?" Emma asked, wiping tears with the back of her hand, leaving wet streaks across her cheeks. David didn't have an answer. How could he explain that sometimes love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between different worlds? That people like them and people like Catherine lived in separate orbits that rarely intersected? "I don't know, sweetheart," he said finally, "but she cared about us. That was real." That night, after bringing Emma home from the hospital, he found Catherine's expensive silk scarf folded neatly on the coffee table beside a handwritten note on Morrison Industries stationery. Her handwriting was precise but with an artistic flourish to the capital letters, the kind of penmanship that spoke of expensive private schools and years of practice. "Thank you for reminding me who I want to be. Take care of each other." Kay. David held the silk fabric to his face, breathing in the faint scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that he'd never be able to name but would recognize instantly if he ever smelled it again. He wondered how someone could become so essential to your life in just a few weeks, carving out a space that seemed impossible to fill once they were gone. The apartment felt wrong without her. Too quiet, too ordinary. Emma's science textbook lay open on the kitchen table where Catherine had been helping her, a half-finished diagram of the solar system abandoned mid-explanation. The chess set sat on the coffee table, pieces arranged in a game they would never finish. Even the refrigerator seemed to mock him with its emptiness, missing the elaborate meals Catherine had somehow conjured from their modest groceries. 2 weeks passed in a haze of normal routine that felt anything but normal. David returned to his security shifts, muscles aching from standing 12 hours straight. Emma went back to school, grades slipping slightly in science without Catherine's patient explanations. They both pretended not to notice the Catherine-shaped hole in their daily lives. Emma stopped setting 3 places at dinner. David stopped automatically buying Kate's favorite coffee creamer at the grocery store. They were adjusting, moving forward, learning to be a family of 2 again, the way they had been before a rain-soaked night had changed everything. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, David's phone rang while he was getting Emma ready for school. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end made his heart stop, blood rushing in his ears like ocean waves. "David, it's Catherine. I need your help." Her voice sounded different, strained, frightened in a way that reminded him of that first night in the rain. The polished CEO was gone, replaced by the woman who'd huddled against a dumpster, desperate and alone. "Where are you?" he asked, stepping into the hallway so Emma wouldn't overhear, pressing the phone tightly to his ear as if he could somehow bring Catherine closer through sheer force of will. "I'm in New York, but I won't be for long." "David, they're going to destroy me. The board has fabricated evidence that I've been embezzling funds. They're planning to have me arrested tomorrow morning." The words tumbled out in a rush, her usual measured speech replaced by urgent desperation. "They've been siphoning money to offshore accounts for years, selling proprietary technology to foreign entities under trade restrictions. I have proof of everything, documents that show the real corruption. But I need someone they can't buy or intimidate to deliver them to the FBI. Someone they would never suspect of being connected to me." David's grip tightened on the phone, knuckles white. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to save my life," Catherine said simply, voice breaking with the weight of her request, "and the lives of 50,000 workers whose jobs they'll eliminate once they gain control of the company. I know it's too much to ask. I know I have no right after lying to you. But you're the only person I trust, the only one who's not part of their world." David closed his eyes, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He thought of Emma getting ready for school in the next room, backpack covered in science-themed patches, cheerfully unaware that her world was about to be upended again. He thought of their quiet life that was finally finding its rhythm again. Getting involved would mean danger, complications, possibly putting his daughter at risk. But it would also mean Catherine might come home. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. The chessboard on his coffee table caught his eye, pieces still arranged in the last game he and Catherine had played. She'd been teaching him strategies, openings with elegant Italian names he couldn't pronounce. He'd been losing that final game badly, but she'd seemed pleased with his progress anyway. "What do you need me to do?" he heard himself saying, decision made the moment he had heard her voice. But as David ended the call and turned back toward Emma's room, he failed to notice the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside it watching their apartment with cold, calculating eyes. The man raised a phone to his ear, voice low as he reported, "Thompson took the call, lasted 3 minutes, 12 seconds. He's in." The game was about to become far more dangerous than either of them realized, and the connection between David and Catherine ran deeper than either of them knew. In the shadows of Morrison Industries, someone had been watching them all along, someone who knew exactly what Catherine had found and would stop at nothing to keep those secrets buried forever. Someone who had known David Thompson long before he'd met Catherine Morrison in a rain-soaked parking lot. Emma's monitors. "I need 5 minutes, Catherine said quietly. 5 minutes alone with my friends." Wells checked her watch with obvious irritation. "Ms. Morrison, the corporate jet is waiting. We have a shareholders meeting at 8 o'clock a.m. tomorrow." Catherine's voice turned sharp, carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I said 5 minutes. Unless you want to explain to the board why their CEO had a nervous breakdown in a hospital room, you'll give me space to say goodbye properly." Wells's eyes narrowed, but she gestured for the others to step outside. When the door closed, Catherine turned to David and Emma with tears streaming down her face. "I have to go," she whispered. "If I don't, they'll destroy everything I've worked to build. 50,000 people depend on Morrison Industries for their jobs." Emma's lower lip trembled. "But we depend on you too. Can't they find someone else to run the company?" Catherine knelt beside the hospital bed, smoothing Emma's hair with gentle fingers. "Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, sweetheart. But I want you to know that these past weeks with you and your dad have been the happiest of my life." She turned to David, and he saw the woman he'd fallen in love with warring with the corporate executive she had to be. "Thank you for showing me what a real family looks like." David felt something break inside his chest. "So that's it? You just walk away?" Catherine stood slowly, transforming back into the powerful woman the lawyers expected. "What choice do I have? You were right yesterday. I have billions of dollars and you work security at a grocery store. I live in boardrooms and you live in the real world. Maybe it's better this way." But her voice shook on the last words, betraying the pain she was trying to hide. Emma sat up straighter in her hospital bed. "That's stupid," she announced with 9-year-old bluntness. "Money doesn't make someone a good person. Dad always says it's what you do when nobody's watching that counts." Catherine smiled through her tears. "Your dad is a very wise man." A sharp knock interrupted them. Patricia Wells peered through the door window, tapping her watch meaningfully. Catherine straightened her shoulders, and David watched the transformation complete itself. The vulnerable woman who'd shared their dinner table disappeared, replaced by a corporate CEO worth billions. She kissed Emma's forehead gently. "Be good for your dad, okay? And remember that bonus moms never really leave. They just love you from farther away." Then she turned to David, and for a moment, her mask slipped. "Thank you for giving me a home when I needed one most." Before he could respond, she was gone, swept away by lawyers and executives toward a life he couldn't begin to understand. Emma cried quietly as they watched the SUVs pull away from the hospital parking lot. David held her close, his own heart breaking, as Catherine disappeared back into her world of power and privilege. "Will we ever see her again?" Emma asked. David didn't have an answer. How could he explain that sometimes love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between different worlds? That night, after bringing Emma home from the hospital, he found Catherine's expensive scarf folded neatly on the coffee table beside a handwritten found note. "Thank you for reminding me who I want to be. Take care of each other, Kay." David held the silk fabric to his face. Breathing in the faint scent of her perfume, and wondered how someone could become so essential to your life in just a few weeks. 2 weeks passed in a haze of normal routine that felt anything but normal. David returned to his security shifts. Emma went back to school, and they both pretended not to notice the Catherine-shaped hole in their daily lives. Emma stopped setting 3 places at dinner. David stopped automatically buying Kate's favorite coffee creamer at the grocery store. They were adjusting, moving forward, learning to be a family of 2 again. Then, on a Tuesday morning that started like any other, David's phone rang while he was getting Emma ready for school. The caller ID showed a number he didn't recognize, but the voice on the other end made his heart stop. "David, it's Catherine. I need your help." Her voice sounded different, strained, frightened in a way that reminded him of that first night in the rain. "Where are you?" he asked, stepping into the hallway so Emma wouldn't overhear. "I'm in New York, but I won't be for long." "David, they're going to destroy me. The board has fabricated evidence that I've been embezzling funds. They're planning to have me arrested tomorrow morning." The words tumbled out in a rush. "I have proof of their conspiracy, documents that show the real corruption. But I need someone they can't buy or intimidate to deliver them to the FBI. Someone they would never suspect of being connected to me." David's grip tightened on the phone. "What are you asking me to do?" "I'm asking you to save my life," Catherine said simply, "and the lives of 50,000 workers whose jobs they'll eliminate once they gain control of the company. I know it's too much to ask. I know I have no right after lying to you, but you're the only person I trust, the only one who's not part of their world." David closed his eyes, thinking of Emma getting ready for school in the next room, thinking of their quiet life that was finally finding its rhythm again. Getting involved would mean danger, complications, possibly putting his daughter at risk. But it would also mean Catherine might come home. "What do you need me to do?" he heard himself saying. But as David ended the call and turned back toward Emma's room, he failed to notice the black sedan parked across the street, or the man inside it watching their apartment with cold, calculating eyes. The game was about to become far more dangerous than either of them realized, and the connection between David and Catherine ran deeper than either of them knew. In the shadows of Morrison Industries, someone had been watching them all along, someone who knew exactly what Catherine had found, and would stop at nothing to keep those secrets buried forever. 3 weeks after Patricia Wells's arrest, spring arrived in Millbrook with determined optimism. Cherry blossoms dotted the park across from David's apartment building, and the morning air carried the promise of renewal. Inside the modest third-floor apartment, life had found a new rhythm, different but somehow stronger than before. Catherine stood at the kitchen counter, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, dressed in jeans and one of David's old t-shirts as she prepared breakfast. The transformation from corporate CEO to domestic partner might have seemed jarring to outsiders, but to those who knew her best, it represented something profound: freedom. "Dad, Kate, look what I found!" Emma burst from her bedroom, science journal clutched in her hands, eyes bright with discovery. The fever that had plagued her during their confrontation with Wells had finally broken completely, returning her to boundless energy. "My article got published in the school science magazine." Catherine wiped her hands on a dish towel, giving Emma her complete attention, a skill she'd perfected in boardrooms but found infinitely more rewarding here. "Let me see this masterpiece." She examined the journal with appropriate reverence, smiling at the title. "Black Holes in Family Systems: How Invisible Forces Shape Our Universe." "The astronomy parts are from what you taught me," Emma explained, "but the family part was my idea. See, I compared gravitational pull to how families stay together even when they can't see the connection." David emerged from the bathroom, hair still damp from his shower, catching the end of Emma's explanation. His eyes met Catherine's over their daughter's head, a silent communication that had grown stronger with each passing day. "That's brilliant, Em," he said, kissing the top of her head. "Sarah would be so proud of your scientific mind." Once the mention of Sarah might have created awkward tension. Now it felt natural, acknowledging the foundations upon which their new family was built. Catherine had made it clear from the beginning that she never wanted to replace Emma's mother, only to honor her memory while creating something new. "She has presentation at school today," Catherine reminded him, sliding a plate of perfectly golden pancakes onto the table. 2 o'clock. I remember, David assured her. The security job at Millbrook Supermarket was behind him now, replaced by a position as operations director at the Morrison Foundation's new community center in town. The flexible hours meant he could attend Emma's school events for the first time in years, one of many changes Catherine had brought to their lives. As they ate breakfast together, Catherine's phone buzzed with an incoming call. She glanced at the screen, her expression shifting subtly from Kate at home to Catherine, the executive. David recognized the look now. Not a mask, but another facet of the complex woman he'd fallen in love with. Morrison, she answered, excusing herself from the table with an apologetic smile. Emma watched her go, then turned to David with unusual seriousness. Is she going to leave again? For work? The question revealed the lingering insecurity beneath Emma's apparent adjustment to their new reality. David reached across the table to squeeze her hand. No, sweetheart. She's handling things remotely right now. The new CEO starts next week. The decision to step down as CEO of Morrison Industries had shocked the business world, but had seemed inevitable to those who understood what Catherine had discovered about herself during her time with David and Emma. She would remain as chairwoman of the board, overseeing the company's ethical transformation from a distance while focusing on expanding the foundation's work. I still don't understand why she can't just be the boss, Emma said, stabbing a piece of pancake. She's the smartest person I know. Being smart isn't the only thing that matters, David explained gently. Catherine wants to be happy too, and she wasn't happy there, not really. Is she happy with us? The question came with vulnerability that broke David's heart. Why don't you ask her yourself, he suggested, as Catherine returned to the kitchen. Catherine set her phone down, immediately alert to the shift in atmosphere. Ask me what? Emma twisted her napkin in her fingers. Are you happy here? With us? Instead of being the boss of your big company? Catherine's expression softened as she knelt beside Emma's chair, taking the girl's hands in hers. Emma Thompson, I have never been happier in my entire life than I am with you and your dad. The company was what I did. This, she gestured to encompass their small kitchen, the three of them together. This is who I am. The simple truth in her words was enough. Emma nodded, satisfied, and returned to her breakfast with renewed appetite. Over Emma's head, Catherine's eyes met David's again, and he saw the emotion she didn't voice. The gratitude for this second chance at family. The lingering amazement that she'd found a home in the most unexpected place. Later, after Emma had left for school and David was preparing for a meeting at the foundation, Catherine sat at the kitchen table reviewing documents from the ongoing investigation into Morrison Industries. The federal case against Patricia Wells and 3 board members was proceeding smoothly, but ripples continued to spread throughout the corporate structure. You still think there's more to find, don't you? David asked, recognizing the familiar crease between her eyebrows, her puzzle-solving expression. Catherine sighed, setting down the papers. Wells couldn't have orchestrated everything alone. The system is too complex, the protections too sophisticated. She rubbed her temples, frustration evident. Something doesn't add up about my father's role in all this. David sat beside her, offering silent support. He'd learned when to push and when to simply listen. Catherine had been wrestling with Wells's accusations about Edward Morrison for weeks, questioning the legacy she'd spent her life protecting. I knew my father wasn't perfect, she continued, staring at a photo of Edward Morrison that had emerged from the investigation files. A stern-looking man with Catherine's intense eyes and determined jawline. But I can't believe he built a company on corruption. Everything he taught me about integrity, about responsibility to employees and community, it had to be real. People can be complicated, David offered gently. Maybe he started with good intentions and things. Evolved. Catherine shook her head. Or maybe Wells was lying to throw me off balance. One final attempt to make me doubt myself. She gathered the papers into a neat stack. Decision made. Either way, I need to know the truth. Whatever you discover, it doesn't change who you are, David reminded her, reaching across the table to cover her hand with his. Edward Morrison's choices aren't yours. Catherine turned her hand to interlace their fingers, the simple gesture still new enough to send warmth through her chest. When did you get so wise, security guard? He smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes in the way that made her heart skip. Somewhere between finding a terrified CEO in my parking lot in falling in love with her. The casual mention of love, still rare enough to feel precious, brought color to Catherine's cheeks. Despite weeks together in the depth of their connection, they were still learning the language of intimacy, still discovering the contours of their relationship. "I need to visit the estate," she said after a moment. "My father's private study might have answers the investigators missed. Records or journals that would explain." "You want me to come with you?" David offered. Catherine hesitated. The Morrison estate represented a part of her life she'd kept separate from David and Emma, not intentionally but out of an instinctive desire to protect their simple happiness from the complications of her privilege. "It's just a house," David said, reading her thoughts with uncanny accuracy. "A big one, probably with pretentious art and too many rooms. But still just a house. It can't scare me off." The gentle teasing broke her tension. 15 bedrooms, actually. And the art is quite good, though yes, some of it is pretentious. She squeezed his hand. "I'd like you to come. This weekend? Emma too, if she wants." Emma in a mansion? With potential secret passages and historic artifacts? Try keeping her away. His expression turned more serious. "Whatever you find there, Catherine, we face it together." That's how this works now. The promise settled around her like a shield. For someone who had spent most of her adult life making decisions in isolation, the simple assurance of partnership still felt revolutionary. Their moment was interrupted by Catherine's phone ringing again, this time with the Foundation's ringtone. She answered with practiced efficiency, but as she listened, her expression changed from professional interest to genuine concern. "When did this happen?" she asked, sitting straighter. "No, don't alert the media yet. I'll handle it personally." She ended the call with a troubled frown. "What is it?" David asked. "Someone broke into the Foundation's research archives last night. Security cameras were disabled, but nothing appears to be missing." She stood, already shifting mental gears. "It's probably nothing, maybe a technical glitch in the security system, but I should check it out." David recognized the undertone in her voice. "But you don't think it's nothing?" "The archives contain all my father's original papers from the founding of Morrison Industries. Historical documents, but also potentially evidence," David finished for her, "of whatever Wells was talking about." Catherine nodded, gathering her things with brisk efficiency. "I need to see exactly what areas were accessed. It might tell us what someone was looking for." "Or what they found," David added soberly. As Catherine prepared to leave, a text message chimed on her phone. She checked it, eyebrows lifting in surprise. "It's from Jackson. He's identified the man who was watching us at the Foundation the night of Wells's arrest." David moved to look over her shoulder at the image on her screen, security footage showing a man in his 60s, distinguished, with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to power. "Who is he?" "Victor Harrington," Catherine said, voice tight with unexpected emotion. "My father's former business partner. They had a falling out 20 years ago, something about ethical disagreements. He left to start his own company. And now he's showing up at a confrontation between you and Wells?" David's security instincts flared. "That can't be coincidence." "No," Catherine agreed, already dialing Jackson for more information. "It can't be." As she spoke with her security chief, David watched the transformation that still fascinated him. The shift from Kate, his partner who made pancakes and helped with homework, to Catherine Morrison, strategic thinker and corporate force. Not separate people, he'd come to understand, but integrated aspects of a remarkable woman who was finally learning to be her whole self in both worlds. When she ended the call, her expression was troubled but determined. "Jackson's team has been tracking Harrington. He's been making inquiries about the federal investigation, meeting with former Morrison board members who weren't implicated in Wells's schemes. Sounds like he's gathering intelligence," David observed. "Question is, for what purpose?" "That's what I intend to find out." Catherine checked her watch. "I need to get to the Foundation archives, then perhaps pay Mr. Harrington an unexpected visit." "I'll come with you after Emma's presentation," David offered. "I don't like the idea of you confronting potential conspirators alone." Catherine smiled, touching his cheek gently. "I've been handling corporate sharks since I was 22, David." "And look how well that turned out," he countered, covering her hand with his. "You hiding in a supermarket parking lot, terrified for your life." The reminder sobered her. Fair point. Partners then? Partners, he agreed. In all things. As Catherine left for the foundation, David couldn't shake the feeling that the peaceful interlude they'd enjoyed was ending. Wells's arrest had closed one chapter, but the mystery surrounding Edward Morrison's legacy and Harrington's sudden reappearance suggested a new, potentially more dangerous phase was beginning. For a man who had once been content with the predictable rhythm of security shifts and quiet evenings with his daughter, David found himself surprisingly prepared for whatever came next. Catherine had not only entered their lives, she had expanded them, showing both him and Emma that safety didn't always mean small horizons. Whatever storm was gathering, they would weather it together. The Morrison Foundation's research archives occupied the basement level of a stately brownstone in Hartford's historic district. Unlike the modern glass and steel headquarters where they'd confronted Wells, this building breathed history: oak paneling, brass fixtures, the faint scent of old paper and leather bindings. Catherine used her private access code to enter the climate-controlled archive room, noting the subtle signs of disturbance that might have escaped less observant eyes. Document boxes returned to shelves at slightly wrong angles, a reference table with chair positioned differently than the Foundation's meticulous archivist would have left it. Someone was definitely here, she murmured to Jackson, who had insisted on accompanying her despite her assurances that she was in no danger. Security system was professionally compromised, he confirmed, examining the control panel near the entrance. High-level work, not your average corporate espionage. Catherine moved systematically through the archives, checking specific collections against the catalog. Most contained exactly what they should: historical documents chronicling Morrison Industries' evolution from a small medical equipment manufacturer to a global technology conglomerate. But when she reached the section containing her father's personal papers, she immediately sensed the disturbance. "These have been searched," she said, examining a box of correspondence from the company's early years. Someone went through them thoroughly, then tried to replace everything exactly as they found it. "Can you tell what they were looking for?" Jackson asked. Catherine spread several documents on the reference table, eyes scanning dates and signatures with practiced efficiency. "These are all from the period when my father and Harrington were still partners, 1985 to 2003. She paused at a particular folder, frowning. "And this one's been opened recently." The folder creases are fresh. Inside were documents pertaining to a research initiative called Project Nightingale, development of advanced neural monitoring technology that had formed the cornerstone of Morrison Industries' early success in medical equipment. "I remember this," Catherine said, scanning the technical specifications. "Father's breakthrough invention. The technology revolutionized brain surgery, allowed for monitoring of neural activity during procedures without damaging surrounding tissue." "Looks fairly straightforward," Jackson observed. "Why would someone be interested in decades-old technology?" Catherine continued reading, flipping pages with increasing concern. "Because according to these notes, the original research wasn't entirely my father's. Harrington contributed significant elements to the neural interface design." She turned another page, eyes widening. "And there was a third partner not listed in the official patents, someone identified only as NS." "Who's NS?" Jackson asked. "I don't know," Catherine admitted, unsettled by this gap in her knowledge of her father's work. "But Harrington might." She carefully photographed the documents, then replaced them exactly as she'd found them. "Let's not alert whoever broke in that we know what they were after. Keep the security breach quiet for now." Jackson nodded his agreement. "What's your next move?" Catherine checked her watch, still enough time before Emma's presentation. "I'm going to pay an unexpected visit to Victor Harrington, see what he knows about Project Nightingale and why it's suddenly interesting again after 20 years. "Not alone, you're not," Jackson stated flatly. "David's meeting me there," she assured him, "and I'll have the car's security system active. I'm not taking unnecessary risks, Jackson." The security chief looked skeptical, but knew better than to argue when Catherine had made up her mind. "At least take this," he said, offering a small device that resembled a luxury pen. "Panic button. 1 click alerts my team, 2 clicks calls emergency services, 3 activates audio recording." Catherine accepted it with a nod of thanks, tucking it into her jacket pocket. As she prepared to leave, her phone chimed with a text from David. "Emma's presentation moved up. Can't meet you at Harrington's. Be careful." Call me after. A flicker of disappointment passed through her. She'd grown accustomed to David's steady presence during challenging confrontations, but she typed a quick response. No problem. Give Emma my love. We'll call with update. Harrington Technologies occupied a gleaming tower in downtown Hartford, its modernist architecture a stark contrast to the historical sensibility of the Morrison Foundation buildings. Catherine approached the reception desk with a confident bearing that had intimidated corporate rivals and impressed shareholders for years. Catherine Morrison to see Victor Harrington, she announced, foregoing the usual protocol of appointments. He'll want to see me. The receptionist's eyes widened in recognition. Catherine Morrison was still a business celebrity, her recent decision to step down as CEO having only intensified media interest in her. Of course, Miss Morrison, let me see if Mr. Harrington is available. While the receptionist made the call, Catherine surveyed the lobby, cutting-edge design, displays showcasing Harrington's neural interface technology and its applications in medical, military, and consumer fields. The company had clearly prospered since separating from Morrison Industries, focusing on direct brain-computer interfaces, while Morrison had diversified into broader technology markets. Ms. Morrison, a smooth voice interrupted her observations. What an unexpected pleasure. Victor Harrington approached from a private elevator, looking exactly as she remembered from childhood visits to her father's office. Tall, distinguished, with silver hair and penetrating gray eyes that missed nothing. His smile was perfect, but never quite reached those calculating eyes. Victor, she acknowledged with professional courtesy, I believe we're overdue for a conversation. He gestured toward the private elevator. My office, then? Some conversations are best had in private. The elevator ascended silently to the top floor, neither of them speaking until they reached Harrington's corner office with its panoramic views of Hartford. Unlike Edward Morrison's traditional mahogany and leather aesthetic, Harrington favored minimalist design, glass, steel, and carefully curated modern art. I understand congratulations are in order, Harrington said as they settled into ergonomic chairs in his sitting area. Both professional and personal. Stepping down as CEO was a bold move. Finding a new family, even bolder. The casual reference to her personal life sent warning signals through Catherine's mind. You seem well informed about my activities, Victor. Information is capital in our business, he replied smoothly. And I've always taken a special interest in Edward's daughter. He was so proud of you, you know, even after our disagreement. Catherine studied him carefully, looking for the tells her father had taught her to recognize in business opponents. The slight tension around the eyes, the calculated casualness of posture. Harrington revealed nothing except what he chose to show. I'm curious about that disagreement, she said directly. Father never discussed the details, only that it involved ethical boundaries he wasn't willing to cross. Harrington's laugh held genuine amusement. Is that what he told you? How fascinating. He leaned forward slightly. Edward was many things, Catherine, but ethically rigid was not among them. Our partnership ended because we had different visions for the technology we'd created, not because one path was more moral than the other. Project Nightingale, Catherine stated, watching his reaction closely. A flicker of surprise crossed his features before he controlled it. You've been doing your homework. Yes, the neural interface technology was the catalyst for our separation. I saw its potential beyond medical applications, direct consumer applications, enhanced human capabilities. Edward insisted on limiting it to medical use only, at least initially. And now, Catherine pressed, someone broke into our archives last night, specifically targeting files related to Project Nightingale. Since you were seen at the Foundation during the confrontation with Wells, I wondered if you might have insights. Harrington's expression turned thoughtful. Interesting timing. The original patents are expiring soon, you know. Perhaps someone is interested in the foundational research now that legal protections are ending. Patents, I notice, only listed you and my father, despite evidence of a third contributor, Catherine observed. Someone identified as NS in my father's notes. The subtle tightening around Harrington's eyes confirmed she'd struck a nerve. Ancient history, Catherine. Collaborative research often involves consultants who don't appear on final patents. This consultant appears to have contributed core elements of the neural mapping algorithm, she countered. Hardly a minor contribution. Harrington stood abruptly, moving to the floor-to-ceiling windows. What exactly are you looking for, Catherine? You've stepped down from Morrison Industries. The foundation is secure. Why dig into technology developments from before you were born? Because Patricia Wells claimed my father built his success on practices I would find morally objectionable, Catherine answered honestly. I need to know if that's true. Harrington turned back to her, expression unreadable. And if it is, what then? Would you dismantle his legacy? Return the fortune built on those decisions? Abandon the charitable work funded by those profits? The question struck uncomfortably close to Catherine's own internal struggle since Wells's revelations. I would want the truth, whatever it is. People deserve that much. Truth, Harrington repeated with a slight smile. Such a malleable concept in retrospect. Edward and I created revolutionary technology that has saved countless lives. Does it matter what compromises were made along the way? It matters to me, Catherine insisted. Harrington studied her for a long moment, then seemed to come to a decision. There are files your father kept separate from the company records, personal research journals that never entered the official archive. If you're determined to understand Project Nightingale's full history, that's where you should look. Where would I find these journals? Catherine asked, keeping her tone measured despite the surge of anticipation. The estate, I imagine. Edward had a private safe in his study, hidden behind that dreadful hunting painting he insisted on keeping despite your mother's objections. Harrington's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, Catherine, your father was a complicated man who made difficult choices in service of a greater vision, just as you have. The comparison unsettled her. I've never compromised ethical standards for profit. Haven't you? Harrington challenged gently. Stepping down rather than fighting to transform the company from within? Accepting the privileges of wealth while distancing yourself from how it was created? We all make our compromises, Catherine. The question is whether we're honest about them. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed with an urgent message from Jackson. Security breach at the estate. Alarm disabled professionally. Police en route. Catherine stood immediately. I need to go. Problem? Harrington inquired with seemingly genuine concern. Nothing I can't handle, she replied automatically, professional mask firmly in place despite her racing thoughts. Was it coincidence that her father's estate had been breached immediately after she mentioned the private journals to Harrington? Or had she just revealed exactly what someone was looking for? Catherine, Harrington called as she reached the door. Whatever you discover about Project Nightingale, remember that your father believed the end results justified the means. As did I. As does everyone who changes the world. The words followed her into the elevator, echoing uncomfortably as she called David to update him on this new development. His immediate response, I'm coming with you, provided the grounding she needed amid swirling questions about her father's legacy and Harrington's cryptic warnings. As her car navigated toward the Morrison estate in the affluent suburb of Farmington, Catherine found herself caught between two worlds again. The corporate intrigue she'd hoped to leave behind and the simple family happiness she'd found with David and Emma. The division felt increasingly artificial. Whatever secrets lay in her father's private safe, whatever truth about Project Nightingale had inspired break-ins at both the foundation and the estate, she would face it not just as Catherine Morrison, heir to a corporate empire, but as Kate, the woman who had found her authentic self in a modest apartment with a security guard and his science-loving daughter. The estate appeared unchanged as she approached, 12 acres of manicured grounds surrounding the Georgian-style mansion where she'd grown up. But Catherine's trained eye immediately spotted the signs of disturbance. A garden gate left slightly ajar, muddy footprints on the stone path that security would never have allowed to remain. She waited in the car for David, who arrived minutes later in his modest Honda, now looking comically out of place in the estate's circular driveway beside her luxury sedan. The sight of him, solid, dependable, utterly himself regardless of surroundings, steadied her racing thoughts. Police? He asked immediately, scanning the property with the practiced eye of security personnel. I asked Jackson to hold them off briefly, Catherine explained. If this break-in is connected to Project Nightingale, I want to see what they were after before officials start asking questions I can't answer. David nodded, accepting her judgment without question. One of the many reasons she'd fallen in love with him. No power struggles, no ego, just partnership based on mutual respect. Tell me about this Project Nightingale, he said as they cautiously approached the house, and why it might be worth breaking into secure archives and mansions after 20 years. Catherine summarized her discoveries and conversation with Harrington as they entered through the kitchen, her childhood shortcut that bypassed the grand formal entrance. The house felt eerily quiet, the usual staff absent due to her extended stay at David's apartment. Neural interface technology, David repeated thoughtfully. That's the stuff that connects brains directly to computers, right? Like in science fiction? Not so fictional anymore, Catherine corrected. Harrington Technologies has developed consumer applications, gaming interfaces, memory enhancement for Alzheimer's patients. Morrison Industries focused more on medical applications, surgical guidance systems, neural monitoring during procedures. And someone thinks the original research contains something valuable enough to steal, David concluded, something not in the public patents. They moved cautiously through the house, Catherine leading the way to her father's study, a room she'd rarely entered as a child, its mahogany-paneled walls and imposing desk representing the boundary between family life and corporate responsibilities. The door stood slightly ajar, confirming her suspicions. Inside, the room had been methodically searched, books removed from shelves and replaced, desk drawers carefully closed after examination, the leather blotter perfectly aligned. Like the Foundation archives, someone had tried to conceal their intrusion. The safe is behind that painting, Catherine said, indicating a dark oil painting of hunters on horseback, the one Harrington had mentioned, which her mother had indeed disliked intensely. Together they moved the heavy frame, revealing a wall safe with an electronic keypad. Catherine hesitated, fingers hovering over the numbers. I never knew the combination, she admitted. Father kept this separate from family or company matters. Any ideas? David asked. Birth dates? Anniversaries? Catherine shook her head. He wouldn't use anything so obvious for something this important. She studied the keypad thoughtfully. Though perhaps, she entered 6 digits, the original patent number for Project Nightingale, shortened to its essential sequence. The safe remained locked. Project completion date, David suggested. Another attempt, another failure. Catherine stepped back, frustration mounting. It has to be something significant to the project, but not obvious to anyone who knew him. What about this mysterious third partner? David asked. NS, could those initials mean something? Catherine stared at the keypad, mind racing through possibilities. NS Nathan Simmons? Nicholas Spencer? She shook her head. Father never mentioned anyone with those initials in connection with the company. Maybe it wasn't a company connection, David suggested gently. Maybe it was personal. The insight struck her with unexpected force. Natalie Simmons, she whispered. My mother's maiden name. With renewed focus, Catherine entered her mother's birth date. The safe clicked open. Inside lay several leather-bound journals, a flash drive secured in a protective case, and a sealed envelope addressed simply, for Catherine, when necessary. Her hand trembled slightly as she removed the items, placing them carefully on her father's desk. The journals were dated, spanning the critical years of Project Nightingale's development. The flash drive looked surprisingly modern for something presumably stored years ago. Someone's been here before us, David observed, examining the safe's interior. Recently, there's no dust on the shelf where these items were sitting. Catherine's stomach tightened with foreboding. The same person who broke into the Foundation archives? Or someone working with them, David agreed. Question is, did they find what they were looking for, or did they leave these items deliberately? Catherine opened the envelope addressed to her, finding a single sheet of her father's distinctive stationery, his bold handwriting immediately recognizable. Catherine, if you're reading this, you've begun questioning Project Nightingale's origins and implications. I always knew this day might come. The journals contain the full truth, both my greatest achievement and my deepest regret. The drive contains proof that I never had the courage to reveal during my lifetime. Harrington will tell you our separation was about application ethics. The truth is more complicated. Nightingale was never meant to be merely medical technology. Its potential goes far beyond what either our company or Harrington's has publicly developed. NS was not just a contributor, but the original visionary. What we did to secure the technology was unforgivable. I've spent decades trying to atone through the Foundation's work. Trust no one who expresses interest in the original research, especially now that the patents are expiring. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. With love and regret, Father Catherine read the letter twice, her father's words raising more questions than they answered. She passed it to David, who studied it with the careful attention he brought to everything that mattered to her. "Who was NS really?" he asked quietly. "And what did your father and Harrington do that was unforgivable?" "I don't know," Catherine admitted, reaching for the first journal. "But I intend to find out." She opened the leather cover, revealing her father's private thoughts from 20 years ago. Neither of them noticed the small device activated beneath the desk, a listening transmitter installed during the earlier break-in, now broadcasting their discovery to someone waiting patiently in a car beyond the estate's boundaries. The figure in the car smiled slightly, speaking into a secure phone. "She's found the journals, proceeding as planned." Project Nightingale's secrets, buried for 2 decades, were about to resurface, with consequences neither Catherine nor David could possibly anticipate. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages of her father's journal, the elegant script filling each line with meticulous precision, just like everything else Edward Morrison had done in life. David sat beside her in the study, a steady presence as the afternoon light slanted through leaded windows, casting honeyed patterns across the antique desk. "He was obsessed with neural interface technology," Catherine murmured, scanning entries from 1998, far beyond medical applications. He saw it as the next evolutionary step for humanity. David leaned closer, reading over her shoulder. Direct brain-to-machine communication, like downloading memories or controlling computers with thoughts. More, Catherine turned another page, her expression growing increasingly troubled. He believed the technology could eventually enable mind-to-mind communication, shared consciousness across neural networks. The journal detailed experiments that had begun as medical research, helping locked-in patients communicate, restoring motor function to paralysis victims, but had evolved into something far more ambitious. Edward Morrison's private writings revealed a man consumed by possibilities that exceeded ethical boundaries of the time. April 16, 1999, Catherine read aloud. NS has achieved breakthrough in receptor bonding, neural signals successfully transmitted between test subjects without physical connection. VH believes market applications limitless, but questions remain about long-term neural stability. Test subjects? David's security training flared with a concern. Human testing? At that stage of development? Catherine nodded grimly. Apparently, and without proper oversight or regulatory approval. She continued reading, each page revealing a darker picture of her father's work. My father, Harrington, and this NS were conducting experiments outside normal research protocols. She flipped forward several months, stopping at an entry that made her blood run cold. Disaster today. Subject 37 experienced catastrophic neural cascade during transfer attempt. Death occurred within minutes. NS distraught but insists we continue. Evidence disposed of per protocol. VH concerned about exposure risk. They killed someone, David said quietly, the implications settling heavily between them, and covered it up. Catherine's voice was barely audible. My father was part of it. She set the journal down, struggling to reconcile the man who had taught her about corporate responsibility with the researcher who had hidden deadly experiments. The cognitive dissonance was physically painful, a tightness in her chest that made it difficult to breathe. Catherine, David said gently, covering her hand with his. Whatever he did, it's not your responsibility. Isn't it? She looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. Morrison Industries was built on this technology. The Foundation's endowment comes from those profits. My entire life, everything I've accomplished, rests on a foundation of unethical research and covered-up deaths. You didn't know, he insisted. You can't be held accountable for decisions made when you were a child. But I'm accountable for what I do now, she countered, straightening her shoulders with renewed determination. Whatever the truth is, I need to face it. All of it. She reached for the next journal, but David placed his hand over it, stopping her. Take a moment first. This is a lot to process. Catherine nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his caution. You're right, in Emma's presentation, we should be there. The school live streams them now, David said, already pulling out his phone to access the link. Mrs. Patterson is recording it too, but we can watch in real time. As the video connected, the sight of Emma confidently explaining her science project to classmates provided a centering point amidst the chaos of revelations. The girl stood beside her poster about black holes and family systems, gesturing with the passionate enthusiasm that was so uniquely her. Look at her, Catherine whispered, a smile breaking through her distress. She's amazing. She gets that confidence from you, David said softly. These past weeks with you in her life, I've never seen her so sure of herself. They watched together as Emma handled questions from her teacher and classmates with poise beyond her years. When one boy challenged her theory about gravitational relationships, she responded with such clear logic that the teacher visibly struggled not to laugh at the boy's chastened expression. That's Sarah's scientific mind and your diplomatic skills, David observed, correcting him without making him feel stupid. The simple statement, acknowledging both women who had shaped Emma's development, embodied everything Catherine had come to love about David. His capacity to honor the past while embracing the present, to see connections rather than competitions. When Emma's presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, Catherine felt a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever her father had done, whatever secrets Project Nightingale still held, she had responsibilities that transcended corporate legacies. Emma, David, the family they were building together. We should continue, she said, turning back to the journals with steadier hands. If someone broke in here looking for this information, we need to understand why it matters now, 20 years later. They worked methodically through the remaining journals, piecing together the fragmented history of Project Nightingale. The narrative that emerged was troubling. A revolutionary neural interface technology developed through increasingly unethical means, a partnership fractured by disagreements about applications and moral boundaries. And at the center, the mysterious NS, whose brilliance had apparently driven the project's most significant breakthroughs. October 3, 2002, Catherine read from the final journal. Decision made to officially separate. VH will develop consumer applications with modified technology. Morrison Industries will pursue medical implementations. Original Nightingale protocols sealed and research terminated per agreement with NS. God help us if anyone discovers what we actually achieved. Or how. David frowned. So they deliberately concealed the most advanced aspects of the technology? Split the applications between companies to hide the full potential? It appears so, Catherine confirmed, closing the journal with a troubled expression. And this flash drive likely contains the technical specifications my father removed from official records. She inserted the drive into her laptop, finding it encrypted with security that would have been cutting edge when created, but was now vulnerable to modern decryption software. Within minutes, she had accessed the contents, technical schematics, research data, and video files labeled simply with dates. Catherine selected the earliest video file, and her father's face appeared on screen, younger than she remembered him, but with the same intense eyes she saw in her own mirror. He sat in this very study, addressing the camera with solemn purpose. This record is my insurance and my confession, Edward Morrison began. Project Nightingale has achieved what we believed impossible. Direct neural communication between human minds without physical interface. The implications are both miraculous and terrifying. Natalie believes. He stopped abruptly, emotion overwhelming his usual composure at the mention of the name. Catherine's breath caught. Natalie, her mother's name. Natalie believes the technology should be destroyed, Edward continued after collecting himself. That humanity isn't ready for this level of connectivity. Perhaps she's right. The death of Subject 37 demonstrates the physical dangers, but the psychological implications are far worse. When minds connect, boundaries dissolve. Identity becomes fluid. David and Catherine exchanged troubled glances as Edward Morrison described experiments that had progressed far beyond what the journals had revealed. Test subjects experiencing memory transfer, emotional blending, and in some cases, permanent psychological changes after neural connection. What began as medical research has become something I no longer recognize. Edward continued, his expression haunted. VH sees only the commercial potential. NS sees evolutionary advancement. I see weaponization potential that could end privacy, autonomy, perhaps humanity itself if deployed without restraint. The video ended abruptly, leaving Catherine staring at her father's frozen image with a mixture of horror and confusion. NS wanted to continue the research despite the dangers. Harrington saw profit potential. My father, she hesitated. He seems conflicted, but complicit. And your mother opposed it completely, David added softly. Natalie. Catherine's eyes widened with sudden understanding. NS Natalie Simmons. My mother was the third partner. The revelation landed with seismic force. Catherine had been 11 when her mother died, a car accident that had devastated her father and altered the trajectory of their family forever. She had known her mother was brilliant, a neuroscientist with multiple advanced degrees, but had never connected her to Morrison Industries' core technology. That explains the safe combination, David said, and why this information was kept separate from the company archives. It was personal for your father. Catherine opened the next video file with trembling fingers. This one showed her father looking more haggard, the timestamp indicating it was recorded nearly a year after the first. Natalie is gone, Edward began, his voice hollow with grief. The official report calls it an accident. Harrington calls it tragic timing. I call it what it is, the consequence of what we created and what she threatened to expose. Catherine gasped, a hand flying to her mouth as her father continued with devastating clarity. She was going to the ethics board with evidence of our human trials. Said she couldn't live with what Subject 37's death represented. Science advancing at the cost of human life. We argued that night. She took the car, the brake lines. He stopped, composing himself with visible effort. No proof, of course. Nothing that would stand up in court. But I know, God help me, I know what Harrington is capable of when his vision is threatened. The implication struck Catherine like a physical blow. Her mother's death, the defining tragedy of her childhood, had not been an accident, but deliberate silencing. Victor Harrington had my mother killed, she whispered, the words feeling unreal even as she spoke them. And my father suspected, but did nothing. David moved closer, his arm around her shoulders, providing silent support as the video continued. Edward Morrison detailing his decision to separate the technology into deliberately incomplete components, consumer applications through Harrington Technologies, medical implementations through Morrison Industries, with the most advanced neural communication aspects buried completely. The agreement protects us all, Edward explained. Harrington gets his profitable consumer technology. I maintain control of the medical applications. The world remains ignorant of full neural integration capabilities, and Natalie's death remains what the official record states, a tragic accident. The final video, dated just months before Edward Morrison's cancer diagnosis, showed a man transformed by years of guilt and compromise. Gray had overtaken his once dark hair, lines etched deeply around eyes that had lost their visionary gleam. Patents expire in 20 years, he reminded himself, speaking as if alone rather than recording for posterity. When that happens, someone will inevitably try to reconstruct what we fragmented. Catherine will inherit questions I've never had the courage to answer. This record must guide her when that time comes. He looked directly into the camera then, as if speaking across time to his daughter. Catherine, if you're watching this, forgive me for my cowardice. Your mother was right about the technology and right about the ethics. I chose wrong, then chose self-preservation over justice. The foundation is my attempt at atonement, but some debts can never be repaid. As the final video ended, silence filled the study, broken only by the gentle ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a sound from Catherine's childhood that now seemed to count down towards some inevitable reckoning. The patents expire this year, she said finally, connecting the pieces. Someone is trying to reconstruct the complete Nightingale technology by accessing the original research. Harrington, David suggested. Catherine shook her head slowly. He already has his portion of the technology, and according to my father, he was the one who wanted my mother silenced for threatening exposure. Her expression hardened with determination, which means I need to have a very different conversation with Victor Harrington than the one we had earlier. Catherine, David cautioned, recognizing the dangerous mixture of grief and anger in her eyes. If what your father suspected is true, Harrington is responsible for your mother's death. Confronting him without evidence or protection would be extremely dangerous. I know, she acknowledged, the corporate strategist in her asserting control over emotional impulses. We need to be smart about this. She reached for her phone to call Jackson, then stopped abruptly, a new thought forming. The third break-in. There have been 3, not 2. David frowned. The Foundation archives, this estate. What's the third? My mother's research, Catherine explained, mind racing with connections. She would have kept her own records, her own notes on the Nightingale Project. If she was planning to expose the unethical aspects to regulatory authorities, she would have compiled evidence. Evidence that might still exist somewhere, David concluded, following her reasoning. Evidence that would prove Harrington's involvement in both the unethical research and potentially in her death. Catherine was already accessing her laptop again, searching through family records with newfound purpose. After Mother died, Father packed up her home office and stored everything in the East Wing. Said he couldn't bear to see her papers, but couldn't bring himself to discard them either. If Harrington is looking for the complete Nightingale research, he would need her contributions too, David noted, especially if she was the original visionary behind the neural communication aspects. They moved quickly through the mansion to the East Wing, rarely used spaces that Catherine had avoided as a child because they had housed her mother's belongings. The storage room appeared undisturbed at first glance, with dust-covered boxes stacked in orderly rows. It looks untouched, David observed, scanning the space with professional attention. Too untouched, Catherine countered, noticing the unnatural uniformity of the dust distribution. Someone's been here and tried to conceal it. They began carefully examining the boxes, finding most contained exactly what their labels indicated. Academic papers, research journals, family photographs. But one box labeled simply personal held something unexpected. A false bottom concealing a leather-bound notebook and a small external hard drive. This was hidden deliberately, Catherine said, carefully removing the items. The notebook contained her mother's handwriting, elegant but precise, the notations of a methodical scientific mind. Unlike Edward Morrison's journals, which had documented the project's evolution chronologically, Natalie had organized her notes by ethical implications and risk categories. She was building a case, Catherine realized as she scanned the pages, documenting every ethical breach, every research protocol violation, every potential harm the technology could cause if developed to its full potential. David examined the hard drive, which bore a small label with a handwritten message, "For Catherine, when you're ready to understand." "She left this for you," he said softly. "Your mother knew someday you'd need to know the truth." Catherine's throat tightened with emotion. A message across time, just like Father's videos, but with very different intentions. She connected the drive to her laptop, finding it encrypted with a password prompt. After several attempts with birthdays and anniversaries, Catherine tried something different, typing "Black Hole Star," the name of the bedtime story her mother had read to her nearly every night, about a girl who traveled through space, finding her way home by following the stars. The drive unlocked, revealing dozens of video files, Natalie Morrison documenting the Nightingale Project from its inception through its darkest developments. Unlike Edward's after-the-fact justifications, these were contemporaneous records of a scientist growing increasingly troubled by her own creation. "The neural receptor bonding has exceeded our projections," Natalie explained in one early video, excitement evident in her voice and expression. So like Catherine's that it was like looking in a mirror across decades. Subjects can transmit basic sensory experiences between connected minds. The implications for locked-in patients alone justify years of research. Later videos showed that initial enthusiasm giving way to ethical concerns as the project advanced. "Edward and Victor don't understand what we're actually creating," Natalie stated in a video dated just weeks before her death. "This isn't just technology anymore. It's potential evolutionary divergence. The human mind wasn't designed for direct neural connection with other consciousness. The blurring of self and other creates psychological changes we cannot predict or control." The final video showed Natalie looking resolute despite obvious exhaustion. "I've compiled everything for the ethics committee. Subject 37's death cannot be dismissed as an acceptable research risk. Victor calls it necessary sacrifice for progress. Edward wavers between horror and fascination. I can no longer participate in what this has become. She paused, emotion briefly overwhelming her professional demeanor. Catherine, my brilliant girl, if you're watching this someday, know that some knowledge comes at too high a price. Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed again. The complete Nightingale protocol should never be reconstructed. The risks outweigh any potential benefit. The video ended with Natalie Morrison looking directly into the camera, her final message to her daughter delivered with fierce maternal love. Whatever happens, trust your moral compass. It's stronger than mine ever was. Catherine closed the laptop, tears flowing freely now. David sat beside her in silence, one arm around her shoulders, giving her space to process the revelation of her mother's courage and foresight. She knew, Catherine said finally. She knew the risks she was taking by opposing Harrington and my father. She left this evidence anyway, even knowing what might happen to her. She was protecting humanity from technology that wasn't ready, David observed, and protecting you by making sure you'd have the truth someday. Catherine nodded, grief mingling with a daughter's pride. And now someone is trying to reconstruct what my parents deliberately separated. The break-ins, Harrington's sudden reappearance, the timing with patent expirations. It all connects. Her phone rang, Jackson's name flashing on the screen. She answered immediately, putting it on speaker. Ms. Morrison, Jackson's voice was tense with urgency. We have a situation. Emma's school received an unexpected visitor claiming to be your assistant, attempting to remove Emma for a family emergency. School security prevented it, but the individual escaped before police arrived. Catherine's blood turned to ice, her eyes meeting David's equally horrified gaze. Emma? Is she safe? She's fine, Jackson assured them. Mrs. Patterson arrived for pickup right on schedule, and we've deployed additional security to escort them home. But there's more. The individual left a message for you. What message? Catherine demanded, already gathering the journals and drives, preparing to leave immediately. Return what belongs to Nightingale, Jackson quoted. Or next time we succeed. David was already moving toward the door, car keys in hand, paternal protection overriding all other considerations. We need to get to Emma, now. Catherine followed, mind racing through implications and strategic responses. Jackson, I need the Morrison security team at David's apartment immediately. Full protection protocol. Already dispatched, Jackson confirmed. But Catherine, there's something else you should know. The school's security cameras got a clear image of the individual who tried to take Emma. And? Catherine prompted, following David to his car. Facial recognition matched to a Morrison Industries employee, Dr. Rebecca Zhao, Neuroscience Division. She was hired 3 months ago, supposedly from MIT's Cognitive Science Department. Check her background, Catherine instructed, sliding into the passenger seat as David started the engine. I want to know who she really is and who she's working for. As they sped toward Millbrook, Catherine's mind calculated possibilities with the precision that had made her a formidable CEO. Someone wanted the complete Nightingale protocol badly enough to target a child. That level of ruthlessness narrowed the field of potential suspects. We need to move Emma somewhere secure, David said, voicing her own thoughts. The apartment isn't safe anymore. The foundation has a safe house outside Hartford, Catherine offered, completely off corporate records, established for executives facing threats in unstable regions. David nodded, hands tight on the steering wheel. What about the Nightingale materials? They're what these people want. Catherine looked down at her bag containing the journals, flash drive, and her mother's research. We can't destroy them, they're evidence, but we can't let them be reconstructed either. We need allies, David concluded, people we can trust with both the information and our safety. As they approached Millbrook, Catherine made another call, not to Jackson or Foundation Security, but to Agent Sarah Collins at the FBI. If Harrington was indeed behind the attempts to reconstruct Nightingale for purposes her mother had deemed too dangerous to pursue, they needed law enforcement resources that went beyond private security. Agent Collins, she said when the call connected, I need your help. It involves technology that could potentially be classified as a national security concern, corporate espionage, and an imminent threat to my family. The word family came naturally now, encompassing not just her blood relations, but the people she had chosen. David and Emma, who had given her back her humanity when corporate power had nearly consumed it. "I'll meet you at the designated safe house," Collins responded after Catherine explained the situation in carefully edited terms. "Bring whatever evidence you have." As they turned onto David's street, Catherine spotted the security team already in position. Two unmarked vehicles with personnel maintaining discreet surveillance of the apartment building. The sight should have been reassuring, but something felt wrong. A prickling awareness at the back of her neck and that had saved her during corporate takeover attempts in boardroom ambushes. "David," she said quietly, "something's not right." He slowed the car, security instincts responding to her tone rather than questioning her intuition. "What do you see?" "Our security is too visible," she murmured, scanning the street with growing concern. Jackson would never position them where potential hostiles could easily identify them. David immediately pulled to the curb half a block away, parking behind a delivery van that obscured their view of the apartment, but also hid them from anyone watching the building. Could they be imposters? Catherine was already texting Jackson. "Security team visible on street. Confirm identity." His response came seconds later. "No team deployed to street. All personnel maintaining perimeter surveillance only. Do not approach." "It's a trap," Catherine concluded, showing David the message. "Those aren't our people." David's expression hardened with paternal fury. "Emma and Mrs. Patterson are in there." "Jackson says they arrived safely 10 minutes ago," Catherine assured him, reading another incoming message. "Foundation security is maintaining surveillance from concealed positions. They're safe for now, but we need to extract them without alerting whoever those people are." As if in response to her words, Catherine's phone chimed with an incoming call from an unknown number. She answered cautiously, putting it on speaker. "Catherine Morrison," a digitally altered voice greeted her. "Or should I call you Kate? You seem to prefer that identity lately." "Who is this?" she demanded, professional mask firmly in place despite the fear coursing through her. "A messenger," the voice replied, "with a simple proposition. The Nightingale materials in exchange for the continued safety of your borrowed family." David's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, but he remained silent, allowing Catherine to handle the negotiation while he texted Mrs. Patterson. "Emergency, take Emma to bathroom. Lock door, wait for signal." "You're making a serious mistake," Catherine replied coolly to the caller. "Threatening a child puts you in a category of criminal that enjoys no protection from prosecution, regardless of corporate connections." "How maternal you've become," the voice mocked. "But misguided. We don't want the child, merely the research that rightfully belongs to those who can complete what your parents began." "Harrington sent you," Catherine stated, making it a declaration rather than a question. A sound that might have been laughter came through the distortion. "Victor Harrington is a relic clinging to outdated applications of technology he never fully understood. Our employer has more comprehensive vision." The statement confirmed Catherine's growing suspicion. There was a third player involved, someone beyond Morrison Industries and Harrington Technologies, someone who had recognized the potential her parents and Harrington had deliberately obscured. "Who is your employer?" she pressed. "Irrelevant to your current decision," the voice dismissed. "You have 30 minutes to surrender the Nightingale materials. Instructions will follow. Deviate from them, involve law enforcement, and the consequences will be regrettable." The call ended abruptly, leaving Catherine and David in tense silence, broken only by the response from Mrs. Patterson. "In bathroom with Emma. She thinks it's a spy game." "What's happening?" David showed Catherine the message, his expression grim but controlled. "Jackson's team can't move against the imposters without risking Emma and Mrs. Patterson. We need a distraction." Catherine's mind raced through options. The strategic thinking that had made her a formidable CEO now focused entirely on protecting the people she loved. "We need to split their attention. Make them think we're surrendering the materials while simultaneously extracting Emma and Mrs. Patterson." Her fingers flew over her phone screen, sending rapid instructions to Jackson. Within minutes, a coordinated plan had formed. Foundation security would create a diversion 2 blocks away, drawing attention from the apartment building's rear exit, while Catherine would appear to approach from the front with the Nightingale materials. I don't like you being the decoy, David objected, though his tone acknowledged the strategic necessity. I'll have a security team disguised as pedestrians surrounding me, she assured him. Your job is more important, getting Emma and Mrs. Patterson out safely when the rear exit is cleared. David nodded reluctantly, understanding the logic but hating the separation. Once they're safe, I'm coming back for you. Catherine touched his face gently, allowing herself one moment of vulnerability before the operation began. I know you will. That's why I trust this plan. Their eyes held a moment longer, volumes of unspoken emotion passing between them. Then Catherine's phone buzzed with Jackson's confirmation. Teams in position. Diversion in 3 minutes. Proceed to front approach point. I love you, David said simply, the first time he'd spoken the words directly, though they'd been implied in 1,000 actions over the past weeks. I love you too, Catherine replied, the declaration feeling like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Now let's get our daughter. As they separated, David moving carefully toward the building's rear, while Catherine walked openly toward the front entrance with a decoy package. Neither of them noticed the black sedan parked across the street, its lone occupant watching with calculating interest. The figure spoke quietly into a phone. They've separated. Proceed as planned. Project Nightingale's deadly legacy was about to claim new victims, unless Catherine and David could outwit opponents who had been planning this moment for decades.